Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Going Mental, where we try to talk sense to men about unsensible women in most cases. Not that just women can be borderline, that's far from accurate. Men can be borderline too, and they can also do great damage to women in their lives. However, this is a show that is geared for men, and it is men that do happen to have a lot of problems dealing with borderline and borderline type people in relationships. So we're going to talk about that a lot. And today, the title of the show is What Part of Borderlines Are Crazy and Dangerous Is It That You're Not Getting? And here's the dilemma, guys, and we get it all the time, and sooner or later we're just going to have to face it. I get emails, I'll lay you dollars to donuts, Dr. T gets emails, but I've gotten emails from guys, honestly, who said, well, my girlfriend had sex with my brother and then threatened to kill herself if I told anybody about it, and then got mad at me a week later and cleaned out the bathroom. Do you think this is an unhealthy relationship for me? We've got a problem there, and I want to start with asking Dr. T, because I like asking Dr. T questions on this program, but the first question I have is, what the fuck is wrong with somebody that they're even asking when you've got infidelity, theft, threats, manipulation, everything you can possibly do wrong in a relationship, all in one story? How do we have guys sitting here asking if that's not good for them?
Well, my easy, immediate answer is there are probably family of origin issues, meaning that they grew up in a dysfunctional, abusive home, and somehow this type of behavior from a woman doesn't seem that extreme. The other, quick and easy answer, and I mean, look, that's a complicated question. There are probably, in most cases, a lot of moving parts to guys who question if violence, pathological deceit, emotional abuse, theft, and other criminal behaviors are acceptable relationship behavior from a woman. Is that culturally, as you pointed out in the write-up you did for today's show, tolerate, accept, and excuse violent, criminal, and in general just really crappy behavior from women.
Okay, let me take that a step further and push even harder for, I think, a more, I don't want to say incisive answer, because you're giving issues have to do with the limits that people end up setting as adults, what they'll tolerate, what they won't tolerate. I know for a fact, I've seen it 1,000 times, that children that are raised not having allowed a sense of boundaries around their person, around themselves emotionally, who they are, with the way they're treated by their parents, certainly have a much greater tendency as adults not to be able to recognize abuse when it's happening, not to be able to recognize that there are boundaries being crossed. But let's say, worst case scenario, you were raised by Lizzie Borden and your father was the Reverend Jim Jones. And of course, in a situation like that, you've got two crazy parents, both of which are probably abusive. You come from a long history of abuse. Isn't there some mechanism in the human brain that can still analytically figure out that threatening to kill yourself because you wanted to watch Dancing with the Stars instead of the Housewives of Los Angeles, isn't there something in people's intellectual state that we can appeal to get them to see, hey, there's something really wrong with that picture?
Well, you would hope. And look, if you're receiving emails like that, and I certainly to them, it's just that they're looking for validation that it is indeed crazy and abusive and not healthy. Um, I think what happens for a lot of guys and women who are in abusive relationships on the receiving end of the abuse is after it's gone on long enough, you don't know. It's hard to determine what is right and what is wrong, and by that I mean, abusers often engage in gaslighting, which means they deny their bad behaviors, deny they do things, minimize their own behaviors. They redirect blame. They tell their victims, well, I wouldn't have had to have done, I wouldn't have had to have slept with your brother and keyed up your car if you had texted me on time. And after a while, I think a lot of targets of abusers start to believe that stuff, or they start to question their own judgment and perceptions. It's a side effect of being abused for any length of time, where you start to believe it is your fault. And if only you could perform the right series of dance steps like Richard Gere in Chicago, you would be able to avoid the abuse, and this woman would return with, and you could ride off into the sunset on a unicorn and eat cotton candy all day. But that's not the case. So in some ways, I think that questioning, like, is it me? It seems crazy, but is it? I think that is often a natural in an abusive relationship. You don't know what's what anymore. Was that more incisive?
Well, it wasn't that any of it is less incisive, because I think we're trying to figure out something here that is quite difficult and complicated, because there isn't just family of origin issues that play into this. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about and why. I've dealt with a number of men who have had wives that cheated on them. And the instinctive reaction for many men is they want to kill the guy. They say, I can't believe this. It wasn't the guy that they had to trust. A lot of times it was guys they didn't even know, and that may not have known that she was married. But their first instinctive reaction is that they want to go kill the guy that had sex with the woman who ultimately was the one that betrayed the relationship bond, that stabbed him in the back. And it is very quick and easy for most men to transfer all that anger and all that outrage that they should feel toward the woman who betrayed them, and immediately transfer it over to a guy who they don't even know. Mm-hmm. I have had a few men tell me, look, I wasn't mad at him. She was the one that screwed me over. She was the one that lied to me. But most of them, and I'm talking like over 90% of men I think that I've talked to, that were outraged and that suddenly had boundaries that were clear and concise, and they weren't going to have that crossed. They were upset not at the woman who crossed the boundary, not at the woman who betrayed them, but at the guy who participated with her, whether he knew he was having sex with a married woman or not. And for somebody, I would understand a lot better if somebody from their family of origin issues had no whatsoever, might sit around and say, well, that's what people do, and I should figure out how to forgive this and whatever. But guys do have a tendency to go after the wrong culprit.
Well, there's that. Although I've had an opposite experience with the guys is that they wish she would have an affair, because for them that would be the clear line in the sand that would make it okay for them to file divorce or break up with her. Never mind getting hit, attacked, called names day in and day out in rage episodes. It'd be easy if she would just cheat on me. Then I could leave, because that I wouldn't tolerate. All of this other really abusive behavior. You know, I want to go back a little bit and add another dimension to why guys question whether or not some of what you or I, and I think many people looking at it, if we receive objectively, would say, yes, this person is a dangerous lunatic and you should look for the nearest exit sign and run as if your butt was on fire. But a lot of the guys I work with have gone to couples counseling or individual counseling with therapists who have an understanding of their abusers and you know, work harder at not triggering their abusers. I had a session with a gentleman just this morning, and he gave me permission to share this. He's potential DBT, that's dialectical behavior therapy practitioners, for his wife, who other individual therapists that they've worked with have said they won't diagnose her, but they have told him privately, yes, she most likely, yet they won't diagnose her, which is part of the problem. But he had a session with a female DBT practitioner, and I gave him some tips on screening, like 1, find out if she's a feminist; 2, find out if she believes that women are capable of abusing men. And so he asked her some very pointed questions. She was a bit defensive, and so if I were to start yelling at my wife in session with you, would you qualify that as abusive? And she said yes. And he said, and if she did that to me in session? She's like, well, I would tell her that that isn't an effective communication technique. Not abusive, just poor communication skills. And this is a fucking DBT practitioner. And then come to find out, she had her undergraduate degree was in gender studies.
I'm so surprised.
Yeah, and she believes in the Duluth model, which is an interesting conundrum. So if your ideology, if you're a therapist, a psychologist, a social worker, a practitioner of dialectical behavior therapy for borderline individuals, many of whom are women, and your ideology tells you that men are always the primary aggressors, and if women are behaving in an abusive fashion, it's because of patriarchy and they're reacting to the oppression of men. How the fuck do you treat somebody with BPD who is abusing their husband, boyfriend, and children if the BPD individual is a woman? Isn't that a conflict?
Well, and I think that's why so many of them go over without being treated, especially, you know, when it plays into couples therapy. There are many therapists that will sit there and know full well they're dealing with a person and feed right into it because of the model that they work with, and what their belief system is that, well, just like you said, her yelling, cursing, screaming, being abusive is a communications error, and if he does it, even in defense of being attacked, then he's being abusive. So
that's right. It reminds me of that one Dr. Phil episode I broke down. I gave her to her a couple of times, and he, Dr. Phil, Idjit, told the man who was on the show, when you do that, that's abuse. When he does that, it's a relationship problem. I don't like it so much.
I don't know if anybody's read Dr. Phil's book, Relationship Rescue. I feel like in honor of the fact that I read it for you, you should contribute to our quarterly fundraiser.
Pain and suffering. I need a pain and suffering donation.
I need a pain and suffering because I read every part of that book. And what I found the most interesting, well, I don't want to say interesting, because nothing was particularly interesting in the book. It was a pandering pile of crap, was what it was.
Well,
But
most self-help books, relationship self-help books are pandering women, because women tend to buy the majority of self-help relationship books, which is why you have books titled "Release Your Inner Princess Goddess Warrior."
yes, of course. Dr. Phil wrote a letter to men in his book Relationship Rescue. It was no, it was actually a letter that he was writing on behalf of all men. He was speaking for me. He was speaking.
That's very magnanimous of him to speak on behalf of half the population of the planet.
Yes, he was a very prick in writing this letter. But in it, he said, I want to acknowledge from the beginning, ladies, that men just don't get it. We try in our own fumbling, stupid ways to get things right, but we're just inherently incapable of it all. Be totally grateful to you for the patience you exercise given how stupid we are. And
So it
then,
was the Dr. Phil version of the Dear Woman video from those two, whatever
bingo,
the hell they were.
bingo.
Harpuno and Tarkunian, what the hell were their names?
Gay Arjuna and somebody Hendricks, I think.
If you haven't seen this YouTube video, Google it. No, it is not a spoof by Saturday Night Live, although Will Ferrell, formerly of Saturday Night Live, did a great spoof video on it that's actually better than the original video. And no, those two men, or whatever they are not kidding. They were totally serious. The name of the video is called Dear Woman or Dear Women. I can't remember.
Dear Woman, and I will have you know that I did a spoof of that video that was even funnier than the Saturday Night Live version, or Will Ferrell's version of that video. But Phil goes on in his letter and instructs men, if they want to get out of the ditch that they have dug for themselves for women, that in so many words, he said, they're going to need to get out on their knees. This is what you've got waiting for you from the wonderful Dr. Phil. But I want to get back on.
And from many therapists, grovel and hope she treats you better.
And you'll get a pat on the head from a lot of therapists for that. I see a fundamental problem, though, and it is partially rooted in family of origin issues, of course. Even if you're from a functional family, which, whatever that is. I mean, who knows what a functional family really is? There's not many of them, but generally families that operate off of decent rules, that raise their kids to have some measure of autonomy, that don't abuse them, where there's open communication and people can talk, things like that. And those families are really, I think, the exception instead of the norm for most families. But even in those families, boys get the message, you better make mama happy. That is a universal message that men in this culture get from the time they're born and all the way through adult. And now, of course, we've got the he for she hashtag going haywire right now, that what men do should be about being for women. It's an absolute nightmare. But what I think we really have going here is that men are coerced by parents, by society, and by women, that they are not supposed to have boundaries, that they're not supposed to have any standard, any line they draw in the sand. They say that is enough. There are women that don't do that to them. I know that they're out there. But finding one of those women and getting past enough of your own issues about your own boundaries in order to attract such a woman can be a very, very difficult thing. So I think we've got a combination of really sick family rules and a really sick culture coming together to the point that I get emails regularly from guys that say, hey man, she's crapping all over my life and stealing from me and lying about me and making accusations that I molested children. Do you think that this is salvageable? No, it's not salvageable. It wasn't salvageable from the beginning. The big question to me is where. Obviously, I think it needs to start with boys, but where and how do we start reaching men with the idea that just being accepted by a woman is not a healthy standard? And this goes back to a question that I think that we've always, and I probably keep hammering on it because I think it's one that desperately needs an answer.
I think cultural shifts need to happen. I think we need more open and honest dialogue. There was an article published, I believe, yesterday in The Telegraph, a UK publication. A female journalist wrote it, and Natasha Evans, maybe, I might be misremembering, but the title of the article is, "It's Not Okay to Hit Men," or "It's Not Okay for Women to Hit Men."
I saw that, and it was really good to see.
It was very well written. She doesn't blame men. Basically, she writes what I've been writing about for years, that this is not a gender issue and domestic violence is not okay or acceptable or funny when women perpetrate it. I thought it was very compassionate and honest, and I was glad to see it. Most of the comments were pretty good, but I think it says a lot when it's a huge, momentous, unusual thing for a mainstream publication to have to publish an article that says it's not okay for women to hit men. I think that says a lot about our sick society, where violence against men is not only normalized, it's accepted, it's the butt of jokes. It's a really sick double standard, and I'm hopeful that we're going to see more pieces like this in the journalism and on radio and in television, because I think is how our attitudes will start to change.
I do think we will. I think that I think some of the work that we've done and that other places similar to what's going on here has been having an impact. That there are journalists that are beginning to recognize that the same old standard spiel of it's never ever okay to hit a woman under any circumstance, even if she saws your leg off with a hacksaw, you should just put a tourniquet on and and call for help and hope she doesn't cut the other leg off.
We need some very special episodes of Blossom or Family Matters or whatever the popular family sitcoms are today, where one of the male teenaged boys is getting beaten up by his girlfriend. I mean, God knows there are enough shows where the reverse is going on.
And they need to make her look like a monster.
They do.
Instead of putting a laugh track with it, which is what they do now. A lot of this, I think, goes back to and media can play a huge role in this. It really can. I mean, unfortunately, human beings are computers of a sort. You program them what to think. They see things repeatedly over and over again. It becomes a part of their belief system. But one of the things I can tell you from personal experience is that one of the best things in terms of practice that I've ever done is practicing in public places when the opportunity arises to demonstrate that I do not value any woman's opinion above my own. Now, if she makes a lot of sense and says something great, then of course I'll listen to it and say, wow, that's a cool idea, or thank you for saying that. I really got something good out of it. But also saying the unexpected, and this is not just for shock value, it is for internal value. It's for something about yourself. I remember one time I was in a social setting, and a woman made, and she wasn't trying to be cruel or misandric or anything. She was just being funny, just saying something off the cuff. And the discussion was about men, women, and sex. And she said, "Yeah, you know what the real pity is that by the time you guys really start learning what you're doing in bed, your equipment doesn't work as well as it used to." And I found myself saying, I know exactly what you mean, but because the time women start learning what to do in bed, their looks are fading. And the whole table went silent.
I'm sure there were draws or jaws dropped in their soup bowls.
Yes, they were. I mean, this was a group of 8 or 10 people at a table in a restaurant or club restaurant, and the jaws dropped. Everybody got quiet, but I noticed looking around the table a few of the guys with that little smile, you know, on their faces, offended, which, you know, not my problem. But the real important thing is that I exercised publicly in front of people that it's a two-way street, that this isn't one of deference to women. If you're living your life in deference, because most of those guys, well, I would argue and say that I was probably the only guy at the table. And the more men summon the courage to stand up and say things like that, and I didn't say it to her in a way that I felt was hateful. I said it in the same tone, with the same sort of glibness that she did. It wasn't meant to insult her, even though that it did. But
you lobbed the ball back.
Yes, I lobbed the ball back right in your court, and what do you want to do with that now? And of course, I had guys come up to me secretly after that and said, "I can't believe you said that, but I'm glad you did."
Well, that was the same about Elizabeth Vargas's crew over at ABC's 2020 for that segment that they never had the courage to air, in which she interviewed you. In fact,
she didn't want
mm-hmm.
on there, and too many of them, they would have cut it down to 30 seconds, which they did. They ran that 30-second spot of her staring at me like she wanted me to die, and
either that or she really wanted a drink.
or had a few.
Maybe you caused her relapse. Who knows? But yeah, no, it's emails about saying similar things, which is thank you for speaking up about this, because I believe men in a lot of their social circles, they can speak up about this because they're shamed and then they're silenced, because there is this prevailing deference to women in our culture.
And I think that's where it starts, that if you can put yourself in a social situation where you are not going to be the guy that sits there and says, "Oh yeah, men are dumb," just because there's women around, because that's a huge problem going on right now. If 30–40% of men started changing that and started saying, you know what, men aren't dumb. As a matter of fact, for every individual human being, as Judgy Bitch pointed out last night, for every individual human being with an IQ over 145, there is 8 men and one woman. Men aren't dumb. Men have created some of the greatest things in human history. And if you get that across to people in a non-defensive, matter-of-fact way, whether it's women or not, you will find that you start shutting down the lies. And I think that's where it begins, is in the social contract between men and women, for men to say, this no longer means that I defer whatever it is you want to say. Like you want to say that MRAs have small penises. Just unzip your pants and show them. No, just kidding.
I'm not going to that conference.
No, no, just kidding. But,
Dr. T says, keep it in your pants.
especially around that woman.
Put it away. Put it away. So, no, I think that's right, and I think it's important for men and women who don't buy into the current cultural norm to speak up in their social circles on Facebook when a woman acquaintance or male acquaintance says something that's particularly hateful and untrue about half of the people on the planet.
Yep.
Like, I don't think my brother's stupid. I don't think my brother is an emotional retard. Do you think that about your brother?
Or your father?
Or your father, or your grandfather, or your son?
That's what it takes, in my opinion. It starts with the basic social interaction between men and women. Because if you learn to hold your own there, and if you learn to, I listen to women talk all the time. I hear a lot of women with great ideas. I love listening to them. I also hear women say really, really stupid things. I hear men doing the same thing. Some great ideas, some real stupid ideas. But what I notice is that there's a difference in me internally how I react. I won't hesitate to tell a guy I think his idea is dumb. And neither will most other guys. And I won't hesitate to tell him I think his idea is brilliant. But there is a wall I have to get through past myself to tell any woman that she's wrong.
I agree. I'm going to post a comment because we've now gone pretty far afield of our stated topic of today's show.
Yes, we have, but that's okay.
I'm going to post this comment from Matthew. Do I click the I or the thumbtack?
Click the I. And
then
I will make sure the comment stays up.
Okay. It's weird because I have to read this backwards.
I can read it forwards if you like.
That would be great.
One of the reasons why I'm personally still single at 32 is borderline personality disorder scares the shit out of me. With it being so commonplace and not enough people telling these women to shut the fuck up, it would be just my luck that I would end up with one of these crazy bitches. Dr. T?
Yeah. It's not that commonplace. It's not like it's not the majority of the population of women who have this disorder. National Institute of Mental Health says it's about, I think, 4 or 5% of the population, but that's just diagnosed reported cases. I think it's probably around 20%. And I include the other cluster B disorders in that, including narcissism, histrionic personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder.
Dr. T, do you include people with significant borderline traits in that number, or do you think that
I would, yeah, significantly traded enough for it to be a problem for themselves and others? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, somebody doesn't have to qualify for a full diagnosis to still be a nightmare and an abusive mess. And at the end of the day, I think the diagnostic label is helpful because you can research it, you can study it, you can learn what signs to look out for, but at the end of the day, whether or not the person actually receives an official diagnosis, in my opinion, doesn't matter. What matters are the behaviors. Are they treating you with respect? Are they purposefully hurting you and delighting in being cruel to you? So whether they ever get a diagnosis or not, in my opinion, if they're not interested in getting help and seeking treatment, then a diagnosis doesn't matter. So they have a label. The label comes in handy if they're actually interested in getting help. But that's just my opinion.
Well, that's a good point. And it is something that I keep struggling to get across in many ways. If somebody does stuff like self-mutilates, threatens to kill themselves over minor stuff, um, tells your family that you're abusing the children when you're not, goes through all these things, you don't need to take her to a doctor. You need to take, or a psychiatrist, you need to take yourself to a lawyer. Um, the what you'll get from a psychiatrist is you'll be emptied out of a stack of cash, and then you'll have a piece of paper, if it's shared with you, that tells you to go see a lawyer,
Right.
or that should be telling you to go see a lawyer. So the lawyer is the first stop. But I do notice that a lot of men seem to think, and why they have this much faith in modern psychiatry, I don't know why. And don't get me wrong, I think counseling for particular problems in life, especially situational problems, for grief, for other things like that, for getting through a divorce, can be extremely helpful while those things happen. They really can make a positive impact on somebody's life. But taking a borderline to a therapist.
I see it as an act of bargaining, a part of the grief process of
Yeah.
letting go of the relationship. It's like, but if I can get her help, if I can just get that diagnosis and get her to see just the right therapist who she won't mind if she holds her accountable on her shit, which is often when and not just people with BPD, but narcissism and the other associated disorders will run from treatment, which is when their behaviors start to become the focus of the therapist. But as I said, to me, I just see that as part of the grieving process of letting go of the relationship. First, oh, it's not that bad. I can hit denial. Then the bargaining comes. Well, if I can just find the right person to get her help, then we can, it'll be wonderful.
And folks, you'll go online and you'll read stuff like dialectical behavior therapy is very, very beneficial for borderlines. Don't you freaking believe it for a
Okay.
minute.
Well, I'm going to put a caveat. I want to stress that this is my opinion. Other mental health practitioners will have, have different points of view on this. But DBT can be very helpful, but it is not a cure. I don't believe there is such a thing as a cured BPD. What DBT can do, if you're lucky, and the borderline sufferer is really working her treatment program, is that she can learn skills to manage her illness, and that is different from cured or recovered. A.J. Mahar, who's written some well-known books and articles on BPD, is actually somebody who has BPD, and she said in an interview that she herself has made the choice not to have a close, intimate, interpersonal relationship because it would trigger her BPD issues. This is a woman, a psychologist, who's been in treatment, who writes extensively on this subject, and she considers herself recovered. If you can't engage in an intimate relationship without losing your mind and going crazy, you're not recovered. You understand your illness, and that's a limitation for you, and she's managing it by not engaging in a close interpersonal relationship. That's a big difference. Now, the figures that some reports I've read that show that DBT can be very effective, what you also need to understand is that these are very small control groups of individuals who have received psychiatric evaluation, received the diagnosis, and are put into appropriate treatment. The vast majority of people who have this condition fly under the radar, and they never get an appropriate diagnosis, and they are highly treatment resistant. So take that for what it's worth, and people with BPD, feel free to tell me what an ignorant asshole I am in the comments. Thank you for the views.
And let's point out, and I mean, and I said what I said, and I still stand by it. I think that perhaps this woman you just spoke of was an example that she got enough help and treatment to recognize that she was not material to be intimately involved with somebody. And that for a borderline, because they seek relationships constantly. They're always looking to be in, most of them are always looking to be in relationship with somebody. That in and of itself is a form of progress, I suppose. But there was nothing in her statement here that suggested to me that the issues that drove her to the conclusion that she should live a more isolated lifestyle and not be with some of her borderline problems suggests to me that the core of her problems were addressed. She learned enough to know that she would be damaging to herself and others by being involved in a relationship, and was able to make a quite rational decision.
That's
And
right.
not that I'm heartless about this. People with borderline personality disorder, they suffer. I mean, they do. There is tremendous emotional suffering that goes with this problem. They are miserable. They self-mutilate. They do things that are so destructive for their own lives. I mean, the percentage of borderlines that we saw come in to alcohol and drug abuse facilities was way out of the norm for the population. Medicating pain, doing anything to alter their state of feeling so that they could feel better. They're in a terrible situation. It's not that I'm not have no sympathy whatsoever for what they're going through, or that I don't care about it. But the fact of the matter is that borderline personalities very, very commonly destroy the people that get close to them. People
Well,
that
that's where my okay. And it goes toward the person who's on the receiving end of that. Now, I want to go back to Matthew's comment for a minute. Matthew, I am not picking on you. Matthew, it's not your luck that you're going to end up with a crazy bitch or a borderline or whatever label you want to put on that. Okay, they do not have magical powers. It's not like they have a force field ray that you are powerless to resist, and they're going to suck you into the emotional quagmires that they live in and the abuse. You have a choice. When you start spotting those behaviors, when you recognize that you are being mistreated, and that the woman who is mistreating you not only has no remorse for the way she's treating you, but that she refuses to recognize that it's hurtful and harmful to you and blames you for the shitty way she's treating you, that's when it's on you to say, see you later, toots, I'm out of here. If you want to be with me, you don't treat me like that. So, don't give these individuals more power than they deserve. Ultimately, you have power over yourself and what you decide to do. And if you start seeing signs that the woman you're dating or interested in is crazy, abusive, dishonest, whatever is going on, end it. Have enough respect for yourself to end it. Have enough care and love for yourself to end it.
That is the best, to me, ever advice you can ever give anybody about avoiding becoming too tied into somebody that's abusive. There is nothing that will protect you from a borderline, narcissist, any other kind of screwed up, abusive personality. There is nothing that will protect you from that better than somebody with a sense of boundaries and somebody with a sense of values that they live by no matter what. If it is not my value to be emotionally manipulated or shamed into doing something for somebody, because look, borderlines don't hide this stuff. They don't know how. It comes out. They don't just like hide it for 90 days. Now, there is the love bombing period and all the human brain chemistry during bonding, that we have a very, very strong tendency to look for how to excuse mistakes in the other person, how to not see their problems, how to look at only the best of them, because that fulfills that euphoric sense of, oh my God, this is the most incredible person I've ever found. But when it comes down to it, the truth of who people are becomes evident relatively quickly in relationships. It really does. It's not something that is just buried and hidden forever. If you're looking at how a person acts, and if it's violating your boundaries, I feel like, God, I hate to do this, but if I'm going to keep her happy, I'm going to have to do this. If you feel like you can't say no to something, you've got a dilemma within yourself that only you can solve. And you're only going to solve that by learning to say no them off, then your problem is solved. Because if somebody runs off because you said, I'm not going to do something, that's a person you want to see gone. I promise you.
Well, and you know, I encounter a lot of men. There's a smaller subsection of the guys I work with who, I swear, it's like a drug addiction. It is like a drug addiction, and when they stop taking a hit off of the proverbial crack pipe, they go into withdrawal. It becomes very painful, and they break no contact, and then they hate themselves for it and compound already feeling a sense of shame, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And they can't break that until the pain of staying in the relationship becomes greater than the pain of the thought of being without their abuser. Some guys never break out of it, and painful to see. They're like babies, you know, crying for their mothers. And I think in those cases, especially so, that there are really powerful family of origin issues at work. And you guys really do need counseling. If you know what's going on and you see how destructive and how the potential borderline woman in your life is, and you can't walk away, you do need to get support for yourself and help, and probably some CODA meetings, and you need to find something else to fill that void that you're trying to get the borderline to fill for you.
There was a beginning. I don't know. Sometimes the comments come and go in our comment feed, and they will disappear for some reason. But there was one that I don't see now that I wanted to put up earlier. That somebody had said that his father fit this model, and he honestly believed that it was going to result in his father's death. Mm-hmm. That was going to be the end outcome. And I'm sorry, sir, that I can't see your comment now. I really did want to get that. Oh.
And then I have a mother comment I want to put up.
Hang on.
Sure thing.
There. Unfortunately, my father is like that, and sadly, he will probably die because of my mother. People, as a rule, that's from Attila Firmino. Typically, my experience is, and I believe this now, somebody doesn't post something like that just because they want to get attention. Somebody posts something like that probably because it's true. There is men that die over this, and women too. These are destructive personalities. Is one of the reasons we keep focusing on them so much here, is because the end result, Tara compared it to addiction. One of the old adages we used to have in treating drug addicts was that there were 3 possible outcomes for people that continued to use drugs habitually uh, uh, over a period of time. That was jails, institutions, and death. It's the same thing. Uh, I'm not going to speculate. I doubt if there will ever be a study on it because nobody's interested in finding real answers. I wonder how many borderline wives have been murdered by their husbands after years of abuse. I wonder how many times that's happened, that somebody has taken abuse year after year after year, and they finally lose it. Doesn't excuse what they're doing, doesn't excuse killing somebody, because you have definitely a moral responsibility to leave before you kill. That is incumbent on anybody, but I wonder, and I wonder how many men end up in institutions and psychiatric treatment uh, because of years of
Stroking out
abuse.
early, heart attack, cancer.
Yes, and how many die? How many suicide? How many develop a disease that will take them out just to get out of the misery, or develop habits that cause diseases like, chain smoking, drinking obsessively, other things that can cause you an early death. I think this happens on levels that would be absolutely frightening if we really started, if Dr. T is right, and upwards of 20% of the population is affected by these disorders. We're talking about a whole lot of consequences for a whole lot of people. Just in a country of the United States has over 300 million people. What's 20% of that? You can end up with a lot of destruction over
And
there.
I'm going to post another comment. This is from Nick Redding over at Men's Rights Edmonton.
We like
I tricked my mom into taking me to a psychologist at 22. She had 2 sessions with him prior to me meeting him, and by the time I got there, he had been primed to see me as the villain. Thing is, I was quite used to being vilified by my own mother. Once I got the therapist to see what was really going on, we stopped going.
Oh, yes, that happens. Hi, Nick. Glad you decided to tell part of your story with this, and that is another common problem. This is one of those setup deals. The mom goes a couple of times to prime the therapist to get their mindset. Okay, I've got this problem child. Here's what he's done. All these terrible things. Of course, I've been a saint of a good mother. I've done everything I can. And so by the time Nick gets there, he's got a guy that does not recognize that whatever's going on is an issue that's family related with family causes, which it is every time in these situations. There is culpability across the board, and of course he got set up to go in and become a target the minute he walked in the door, and the minute that he established that there was something more than him being a problem, of course, that's when the therapy ended.
Yep, that happens to so many men I work with, men who leave comments on my site and who participate in the Shrink for Men forum. They go from marriage counselor to marriage counselor. Marriage counselors, okay, well, your wife is she's upset about these issues, we're going to work on you, and then we'll work on her. And then as soon as the focus switches to the individual with BPD or suspected BPD, treatment is done and over. The therapist doesn't know what they're talking about. It's still all your fault. And that can become a cycle that goes on for years and years and years. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to share another comment by Jaffaus, I think is how it's pronounced. As a survivor of a BPD girlfriend, the only advice I can give is to draw a line in the sand, make her accountable for her own behavior, follow through and leave when she crosses the line, cut off all contact with the individual in question. She will do everything in her power to try to find something in you to hate. She will do her utmost to find a reason to come after you leave. Don't give her any reason to do so. Don't talk about her. Don't put her down after you left her. Do your best not to discuss her with anyone. Try to keep news of your new relationships as far away from the BPD ex as you can. After you do that, you can get a measure of peace. Okay, I agree with parts of this, and I disagree with other parts of it.
Let's hear it.
No, you don't go on Facebook and post, Molly is a crazy ass BPD. You don't do that. But within your own support system, talk about what's going on in your relationship. That's part of how you reality test. You need support after you've been abused and possibly traumatized by someone like that. Abuse thrives in secrecy. The best disinfectant is sunlight. And it's also a way that you can counter the more than likely smear campaign that she will embark upon after you break up with her.
I would also make sure that your support system doesn't have an overlap with her support
That's
system.
right. That's right. You want to make sure that you cut mutual people who were not your friends originally, or perhaps she's co-opted your friends. You need to keep them at a safe distance and not let them be privy to what's going on in your life. But your family members, absolutely discuss this with them.
But, you know, to the rest of what he had to say about drawing a line in the sand and leaving
Yes,
when
that
it's
I agree with.
that
100%.
is really sound advice, really important advice.
Yeah. And I also agree with the, you know, if you do meet a nice, lovely, sane, emotionally mature, equal partner, girlfriend, yeah, don't make a Facebook announcement. Oh my God, I'm so lucky. I finally met a nice, decent woman. Odds are, you know, your ex could be cyber stalking you. And no, you don't want to rub that in her face, because that's like oftentimes. But you can and certainly should talk about what you experienced. Again, you know, there's private communications, although I think today communication is completely public because of social media. But I think privately, you should talk to your friends and family.
You should also keep in mind that if it's only been 48 hours, you really don't know much about this woman. So this new, wonderful, perfect one.
Yeah.
Part of the problem in the beginning is not being thoughtful, thinking inside with your heart or with other parts of your body is what generally gets men in a lot of trouble. At some point before you decide that this is a really good person, that is a decision you're going to have to make with your intellect and nothing else. And that takes a little bit of time. And speaking of time, I see we're nearly out. Dr. T, is there any parting thoughts that you want to pass our way?
No, thank you. I think I'm nothing's coming to mind. So.
Okay. Apologies to everyone. We wandered off topic a few times, but I think it was a good wandering. I have a couple of quick things. One, and I'm compelled to, of course, to remind everybody that all this programming, all this stuff from A Voice for Men, Shrink for Men, the work that we do, the advocacy, you just saw an interview I did with Sage Gerard about KSUM and all the craziness they're going through, simply to have a conference on that campus where we can talk. And by we, I mean myself and Janice Fiamingo, Karen Strawn, oh gosh, who else was it? Jonathan Taylor. Will be talking about the realities being faced by young men on campus on November 1st at Kennesaw State University. All these things, pushing these things forward, getting stuff done does take money. It takes money to pay for 4 servers. It takes all kinds of money to do everything that we do. Would very much appreciate it if you would visit A Voice for Men today. Donation button at the top right corner of the web page, and throw something in the tip jar there. Every little bit. Our expenses as our organization has grown have increased drastically. It is pretty critical these days that we raise more money than we've been used to. The other thing I wanted to address briefly before we left is that in one of our other hangouts that Dr. T and I did that had to do with borderlines, predictably and completely understandably, there were a few borderlines that rushed into the comments that were saying, "What about me? What about me and my pain? You should be talking about me." Well, I ended up banning one person, and another commenter came to me and said, "Well, he actually liked fucking with borderlines. It was kind of fun for him." And I understand that. I mean, I think it's somewhat like shooting fish in a barrel, but I understand. I understand if you have a history of being abused by borderlines, that getting into an exchange with one online might be appealing to you. So what I told the guy was, okay, I tell you what, we'll count the upvotes that you get on your comment. I'll compare them to the one I'm writing now, and if yours get upvoted more than mine, then I will reverse myself in my policy, and I will allow people to come in and post all of the "please pay attention to me instead of the people that I destroy" comments that they want to make. Well, his comment got a ton more upvotes than mine did, so I'm going to hold true to my word. Borderlines are welcome to come in here and tell us how we have everything wrong, how the attention should be on their pain and misery, and we should quit worrying so much about the people's lives who they've destroyed. That will be in the comments if people want to make that, and you, of course, as regular viewers, are allowed to respond to those in kind. Just no statements of violence, please. We do not allow that on any of our forums. But I have reversed myself, and the BPDs can now come in and talk about how put upon they are by us having an honest discussion about the damage they create in other people's lives.
It's the opposite on my website. The guys there are trying to focus on dealing with their issues and getting support. They don't need that kind of harassment. So my policy is to ignore and not engage. But this is AVFM is your YouTube channel, and I don't have to deal with the comments. So that is obviously your choice. And I do have one announcement.
A very good reason to encourage you, if you would like an environment where borderlines are not running in to tell you that you're a selfish bastard for wanting to resolve the problems they've caused in your life, go and join the forums at strengthformen.com. You will find a very supportive environment of people that have been through the same kinds of things that you have, and it will be without the unwanted interference of attention whores that want to come in and make the problems about them, which is what borderlines do better than they do anything else.
And I do have one announcement. I'm sorry I forgot about it. October is Domestic Violence Month. I'm going to be doing on both Shrink for Men and avoiceformen.com what I did last year, a public awareness campaign for male victims of domestic violence called In His Own Words. And there is a post on the front page of shrinkformen.com, and it's somewhere on avoiceformen.com that has a description of the submission guidelines. We're also looking for stories from women who have been affected by the collateral damage of seeing their husbands abused by an ex-wife who's still causing problems, a daughter-in-law, a sister-in-law who's caused a huge rift in the family by isolating and brainwashing your loved one. So women are welcome to submit their stories about domestic violence against men, because, of course, if someone you love is being abused, it affects you too.
Please.
And children from, say, fathers who have married, adult children, I should say. I don't want stories from minors, but you get the meaning. And again, the guidelines are in a post on both Shrink for Men and avoiceformen.com. Thank you.
And if you have any questions about it, you can write us. Very much encourage you to submit those. Dr. T, I don't know how she did it, but in the month of October last year, she did a complete post, and I mean a lengthy story detailing events every day for 31 days. She's committed to doing that again for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And this is the only person I know of that is making such an exhaustive effort to get the other side of this story out here. Otherwise, we are left with Ray Rice hysteria as a way to view domestic violence. That's not quite enough that's going to cut it. This is the antidote to the false belief that domestic violence is a problem suffered only by women. You read those stories, they're very good in a bad sort of way, but it's an important part of getting the message out there consistently. And I think this sort of thing makes an impact because I know that we recently, Dr. T, what publication was that in that we recently saw the article, Women Should Not Hit Men?
It's not okay for women to hit men. That was in the UK Telegraph.
Yes, and it was a serious article. It wasn't just a tongue-in-cheek piece. It was a deadly serious, very well-written article about women's violence and how it is just as bad as men's and how it should not be happening. And the more we do stuff like that, the more we will inspire people in the mainstream to come out with these articles and start changing the narrative. If you're happy with the women-centric, gynocentric version of domestic violence, then by all means don't contribute. But if you want to see changes in this society about the way people perceive domestic violence, who the victims are, who the perpetrators are on both sides of the fence, give us a contribution. We'll put it out there. We'll get it out to the world, and hopefully we can start changing this, or rather I should say continue to change this for the better. And with that, I want to thank everybody for showing up. Thank Dr. T always for her great expertise in these matters. And we will see you all tomorrow you will see myself, Tom Golden, and Warren Farrell on Mainstream Media. And then come Monday, you will see us back. We took a week off from Intelligence Report because we're lazy slugs and don't like to do anything. But we'll come back with a double good version of Intelligence Report on Monday, and Dr. T and I will be back a week from today with another episode of Going Mental. Bye-bye, everybody.